Support for The Common comes from the law firm of Davis Malm, representing HR personnel, businesses, executives, and individuals, gives Davis Malm's employment lawyers a 360-degree view of every workplace situation. Learn more at davismalm.com. Support for this podcast comes from Boston University's Questrom School of Business, presenting the Is Business Broken podcast, featuring conversations about the role of business, stakeholder relations, and government at bu.edu/Questrom or wherever podcasts are available.
WBUR Podcasts, Boston.
I'm Daryl C. Murphy, and you're listening to The Common. As promised, we're back to talk about the election results and what it could mean for Massachusetts. Now, whether you're excited or deeply concerned about it, another Trump presidency is almost certain to leave a lasting impression on our political reality. So here to help us think through our future here in the Commonwealth, we have WBUR Senior Political Reporter Anthony Brooks. Hello, Anthony.
Hey there.
And WBUR State House Reporter Walter Wuthmann. How's it going?
It's going well. How are you?
So, Walt, I want to start with you. It's been a little over a week. How are you seeing people settle into another election of Donald Trump?
Well, at least on Beacon Hill, all the Democrats who are elected and lead there are preparing for a second term of Donald Trump and all that might mean. Governor Healy had a press conference the very next day at the State House. Basically the entire press corps was there, and she really warned people against complacency and promised that Massachusetts would continue to be a safe place to live and a government that protects her residents' rights. Here's a little of what she said.
In moments like this, I also think it's important to remind everyone that this great country of ours is bigger than any one person alone. We all have a role to play in building the kind of community, state, and country that we want to be.
Healy pointed out that she's been here before. She was the attorney general during the first Trump administration, and she said she's ready to take him on again. And so Governor Maura Healey has been out front saying that she's going to protect access to abortion care, that she's going to prevent the Massachusetts State Police from participating in any sort of planned deportation force. This is one of the things that President-elect Trump has said he wants to, get going on day one, deporting millions of undocumented people from the country and using local police to do that. Attorney General Andrea Campbell has also addressed that, said that her office is looking in ways to prevent that. And then federally, in our delegation, Senator Elizabeth Warren is pointing out that they still have 2 months of a Democratic majority in the Senate and that they have a lot of work to do.
Okay, so I want to come back to that. I want to ask you, how are you seeing voters respond now that time has gone by, people have had a chance to process and whatnot?
It's interesting. Anthony and I were both out at the polls on Election Day, talked to a lot of voters. I was around Chelsea, East Boston, Revere, spoke to many, many Kamala Harris supporters who, I think felt very confident that she was going to win that night. Clearly she did not. And then if you start to look at the data, Harris had much less support in Massachusetts than Biden did 4 years ago.
Interesting.
There's a lot of things you can draw out of that. But for right now, it looks like the enthusiasm for the Democratic Party that was there in 2020 was just less this time around.
Anthony, how about you? What kind of responses did you get from voters?
Yeah, well, we have a voter we can listen to. On Election Day, I drove through central Massachusetts. I started in the town of Townsend, right in the middle of the state, not far from the New Hampshire border. It has supported Trump in the past, and it voted for Trump on Election Day. And I spoke to Jack Moran, who was a Trump supporter, and he told me what you hear from a lot of folks who supported Trump, that he was upset about the border and that he felt the economy was no longer working for him and for working families. So this is what he said.
I'm looking at the Trump record. I just think he's a proven leader. I'm not real happy with the last 3.5 or 4 years. So I'm going to go back to the 4 years before that.
So, Daryl, I mean, I think that sort of is one of the major reasons. You know, a lot of folks are really asking the question, exactly what happened on election day and what does it mean? And I think one of the most surprising things, I mean, I'll speak for myself. I actually thought Kamala Harris was going to win. And the reason I thought that is because I doubted that Trump was going to be able to expand his numbers. There was this sense, and a lot of people believed it, that he had the ceiling upon which he couldn't go. And the thing that was astounding to me on Election Day was he actually grew his base. He grew his numbers by about 5 million votes across the country. And that, I think, surprised a lot of people. And I think Democrats were stunned and are now going through a kind of come to Jesus moment to try to figure out what happened. Their numbers just did not come out on Election Day.
Yeah, a lot of people stayed home.
A lot of people stayed home. And so now Democrats are really trying to figure out what exactly happened. And as we heard from Jack Moran, I think one of the major reasons, and the exit polling shows this, is there was a lot of concern about the economy. There was a lot of concern about immigration. And when you look at the economy, I think where Democrats sort of lose the plot a little bit is you can look at these macro numbers. You know, you can look at unemployment, you can look at inflation coming down, you can look at the stock market going up, and you can sort of say, well, things are doing pretty, you know, we're in pretty good shape. But the fact is that lots and lots of voters, and you would meet these folks at Trump rallies, I certainly did, who just said they weren't feeling it. And they almost felt sort of like a betrayal being told that the numbers tell them that the economy is good, when their economy was not good. You know, and the issue that we have in this country is that while inflation is down, it's true, and a lot of these macro numbers are good, it's going to take a while for people to feel the effect of this improved economy, and not enough of folks did on Election Day. And I think that's one of the major reasons.
Got it. Now, let's move away from the economy for now and dig deeper into some of the policies that we could see shift here in Massachusetts. What are the tools and levers that Governor Maura Healey and State Attorney General Andrea Campbell have to hold the line here?
There are tools they can use, and it's going to be really interesting and significant to watch going forward. And I'll start this question and then hand it off to Anthony, who reported on Maura Healey when she was Attorney General. But when Healey was Attorney General, she sued or was involved in lawsuits against the Trump administration nearly 100 times. And the Boston Globe did an analysis of those lawsuits, and they found that she and the party she was part of won more than 70% of the time. So think about, you know, Trump's first version of the, you know, he called it a Muslim ban, but it was a travel ban against people from certain Muslim majority countries. You know, they sued over different environmental regulations. So now Attorney General Andrea Campbell is promising to do the same thing. I went to a press conference the day after the election at 1 Ashburton Place, the big state office building across from Beacon Hill. AG Campbell came out, and here's a little bit of what she said.
The Massachusetts Attorney General's office is the best public law firm in the country. We will not shy away from the mission to serve, protect, and defend our residents. We are ready for this moment. We are ready to take action as needed.
So AG Campbell is definitely preparing for this aggressive role, sort of like Healey did. Now that Healey's the governor, she's the chief executive of the state, and she has more things to think about in some ways. There's all this federal funding that comes into Massachusetts, funding for roads and bridges and environmental projects. These are things that the incoming president has already threatened to cut if states do not comply with certain policies. So it's going to be an interesting balancing act for Healey. And I know Anthony's been reporting on this, so I'm just going to turn it over to you.
Yeah.
Well, I'm in the process of reporting on this, but what's interesting, Daryl, is you asked about the levers, and Walter talked a little bit about that. I mean, when Healey was Attorney General during the first Trump administration, her administration sort of became known as ground zero for the Trump resistance. As Walt mentioned, she took on a challenge to Trump's travel ban, which went all the way to the Supreme Court. She challenged an effort to rescind DACA, which protected young immigrants brought to the U.S. illegally. She also sued to protect parts of the Affordable Care Act. She also sued the Department of Education at least 3 times for failing to protect student lenders from fraud. And she sued or joined other lawsuits against the EPA for halting, delaying, or rolling back environmental regulations, and a bunch of others. So those are the kinds of things that will be available to Attorney General Andrea Campbell when it comes to protecting Massachusetts. Another huge issue is if Trump makes good on his threat of mass deportations, what does that mean? Trump would like to use the state police in the various states to do that. The Massachusetts State Police has been very clear that they're not going to get involved in rounding up immigrants. So that's going to be a flashpoint and a point of resistance within the state of Massachusetts. So those are the kinds of levers and those are the kinds of conflicts and battles, I guess, we're going to be looking for as we move into the second Trump administration here in Massachusetts.
Anthony, I want to stay on that topic of mass deportations, right? For context here, in June of this year, the Migration Policy Institute reported that the Biden administration was on pace to match Trump's deportation numbers during his presidency, right? But the difference is Biden focused more on the border than interior removals.
Right.
And considering what Massachusetts has been dealing with the emergency shelter crisis, should we be surprised by a shift in opinion in terms of mass deportations?
It's really hard to fathom that because when you're talking about mass deportations, it's not even exactly clear what we're talking about. Mm-hmm. I mean, in terms of a shift of opinion, I think Governor Maura Healey's in an interesting situation because she came out in favor of the bipartisan bill that was actually a pretty conservative approach to dealing with the border crisis. Mm-hmm. And when it was clear that Massachusetts was facing huge expense, up to $1 billion to house these people, mm-hmm. She went before a hearing at Beacon Hill and said, we've got to pass this bill. And just last week, she also mentioned that she hopes that the new administration can take steps to deal with the border issue to help states like Massachusetts. So, it's not clear exactly how far would be too far, because if she gets everything that the Trump administration has been promising, that's obviously going to cross a line with her. At the same time, like many states, Massachusetts is struggling with this issue, mm-hmm. and Maura Healey wants help. So in that sense, there is an interesting evolution about her sort of public view of this issue. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Does that make sense to you, Walt?
Yeah, and I found that comment from the governor kind of amazing when she said that she hopes the new administration and Congress, meaning President-elect Trump, and in all likelihood a completely Republican-controlled Congress, passes a border bill, secures the border, and gets immigration law on the books. This is the Democratic governor of Massachusetts. This is the former leader of the resistance and the person who sued the Trump administration 100 times, saying that she hopes they pass a border bill.
Yeah.
I did find that comment really striking.
Mm-hmm.
See, I heard that comment a little differently.
Oh, hit it.
Here's how I heard that comment. It's like, okay, you've been talking immigration, Donald Trump and Republicans. Now the ball's in your court. Deal with it. I mean, I didn't hear her necessarily saying, I'm in favor of mass deportation. I'm just saying,
no.
We've got a problem. And I've been talking about the need for Washington to come forward and help us solve this problem. Republicans ran on it. They won. So solve it and help the states do it. I think if they push too far, obviously they're going to get resistance from governors and states like Massachusetts. But that's what I heard.
So is this,
but maybe really fickle resistance, know? What is the Democratic governor of Massachusetts going to do against a Republican Senate, House? And again, these numbers are, at the time of recording, these numbers are in flux, but, a Republican Congress and a deeply, nationalistic, anti-immigrant president. What can Maura Healey do?
Yeah. No, it's a great question.
Yeah, I mean, that's the question, right? Is like, if I know that I have a president here who wants to do mass deportations and I say, well, you solve it. He just told you how he's going to solve it, So, what is Maura Healey saying when she goes, okay, this is a problem, you fix it? Well, we just told you how we're going to fix it.
A lot of this remains to be seen. Anthony's point that, President-elect Trump talks about this stuff, but we don't know the plan. Mm-hmm. What's the plan? We're going to see.
Understood. We're going to take a quick break, and we're going to come back, and I want to talk a bigger picture about, how the Democrats move forward from here and Massachusetts' role in that. So we'll be right back.
I'm Meghna Chakrabarty, host of On Point. At a time when the world is more complex than ever, On Point's daily deep dive conversation takes the time to make the world more intelligible. From the state of democracy to how artificial intelligence is transforming the way we live and work to the wonders of the natural world. One topic each day, one rich and nuanced exploration. That's On Point from WBUR. Be sure to follow us right here in your podcast feed.
And we're back with WBUR Senior Political Reporter Anthony Brooks and WBUR State House Reporter Walter Wuthmann talking about the election. So, Walt, you were working in 2016 when Trump won that election. How do the reactions differ now from then?
Yeah, 8 years ago, I was on the newscast desk here at WBUR, and those were really, really busy days after the election. And this is not so much hard reporting as just sort of a vibe check, but I remember this feeling of shock and defiance and all of the, top Democrats in Massachusetts parading out to their podiums and microphones and saying, this is not who we are. This will not stand. Massachusetts will be the tip of the spear of the resistance where, you're safe to love who you want to love and be who you want to be, and you're safe from deportation. Think about former Boston Mayor Marty Walsh saying, undocumented residents of Boston are safe, and I will shelter them personally in City Hall as a last resort. That sort of feeling of defiance, I'm not seeing it as much anymore. Yeah. I'm just not. The governor came out and did a press conference. The AG came out and did a press conference, as we saw. But, even as Andrea Campbell approached the microphone,
she'd say, good morning, good afternoon.
She slumped her shoulders and started with a big sigh. And this feeling of, here we go again.
Here we go again. And there's a key difference, though, from 2016 and what happened just last week. In 2016, Hillary Clinton won the popular vote.
Right.
And there was a sense among Democrats and a lot of people that if not for James Comey intervention late in the
but her emails.
Yeah, her emails. If not for James Comey's intervention late in the election, if not for Russian interference, whether or not that tipped the election, we can sort of spend the rest of this hour debating. The feeling was Hillary Clinton would have been president. Mm-hmm. There was a sense almost of illegitimacy when it came to Donald Trump. The difference this time is he won the popular vote. So it's much harder, I think, for Democrats to come out with that sort of sense of self-righteous indignation. I think there is going to be resistance, as we talked about, but I think Walt is absolutely right. There's a palpably different feel this time around. Because I think rather than sort of pointing the finger at people who voted for Trump and saying, why? Democrats are looking at themselves and saying, why did we lose? What have we done wrong? And this is going to be, I think, months, if not years of soul searching to figure that one out.
So the Democrats lost big time, but I wonder if there is some sort of silver lining here for us here in Massachusetts.
Here's what I would focus on at the moment, Daryl. It's sort of stunning to me to think about the influence that Democrats are going to lose or have already lost, not only in Massachusetts, but across New England. Consider that all across New England, there is one Republican member of Congress. That's Senator Susan Collins of Maine. All of the other members of the congressional delegations from all of the New England states are Democrats. There are only 2 Republican governors, Phil Scott up in Vermont, and he is not a Trump supporter. He didn't vote for him. And Kelly Ayotte in New Hampshire, who's had a difficult relationship with Trump going back to the Access Hollywood tapes and release of the Access Hollywood tapes in 2016. So there is very little sort of direct channels to Washington, if you will, from the constitutional officers across New England and the congressional delegations. And that's going to lead to an enormous amount of erosion of political influence. I was struck today by an announcement from Elizabeth Warren's office that she is now going to become the top Democrat on the Senate Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs Committee in the next Congress. That's because Ohio Senator Sherrod Brown was defeated. So, yay, she's the top Democrat. But guess what? She's going to be, in the minority. And so she's going to have a lot less clout as a member of that party.
So that's a no. That's a no.
You mean that's a no to the question, is there a silver lining?
Is there some sort of silver lining here?
If there's a silver lining, I think the silver lining is the Democrats have to figure out what they got wrong in this election and how they can reach working class voters. And, I think there's going to be a lot of pressure to ensure that they do. And don't forget, these political wins change direction very quickly. As we know, in midterm elections, the party in power often suffers losses in those midterm elections. So are we looking at Democrats taking over either the Senate or the House again 2 years from now, as happened after the first election of Donald Trump? It's very, very possible. I would even say it's quite likely, but we'll just have to see.
Yeah, and I guess if you look to the words of Governor Healy, she hopes the administration and Congress pass a border bill. Mm-hmm. We don't know what that would look like, but she says that that's something she wants and thinks would be a benefit.
Going back to what you said, the ball's in your court now.
Yeah,
so.
If you look at sort of more economic populist senators like Elizabeth Warren, like Senator Bernie Sanders in Vermont, there are parts of President Trump's economic message and policy that I think they resonate with. It's hard for them to talk about, but yes, there could be silver linings for New England and for all the Democrats here that we've elected.
Mm-hmm. I want to go back to what Elizabeth Warren said earlier, what you mentioned, Walt. We still have time. We're, a little more than 2 months away from the inauguration. What can be done in the time being?
Senator Warren came on our morning edition the very next day and said, we have 2 months. We have a backlog of judicial appointments. We need to get to work. Here's a bit of what she said.
It is important that we use every single day to get our judges confirmed. Those are lifetime appointments. And while we don't have the Supreme Court, while I understand that Donald Trump and Republicans may put additional people into the slots that come open later on, I still think it's important to have a judiciary that is independent and make sure that we have confirmed as many of our nominees as possible.
So, she and her fellow Democrats will be pushing for that. As she said, judges are lifetime appointments. You want to get as many of those done as possible before a new Congress and administration comes in. I found it interesting that California Governor Gavin Newsom has called a special session of the legislature there. My home state, sort of an anti-Trump session. He wants to pass all this money to fund future lawsuits against the administration. We haven't seen a call like that in Massachusetts, but our rules are a little different. Our legislature is still technically in session, and they're actually planning a big vote on this giant economic development package, which would also shore up things like, environmental policy and offshore wind stuff that could be threatened in a future administration. So,
we've talked about offshore wind a little while back on the show, yeah.
Yeah, and our colleague Miriam Wasser has done really great reporting on this, that, the incoming president is very against offshore wind for various reasons. It's a huge upcoming industry in Massachusetts, a huge potential source of electricity, and a lot of people in that sector are really, really worried about these next 4 years.
So, moving on, as we close, we talked about a lot today. I wonder what you both are specifically looking at as we are about to enter this Trump presidency. And Anthony, I want to start with you.
I think I go back to the conversation that we were having just a moment ago about sort of to the extent that there's going to be a resistance, what is that going to look like? Walt mentioned the sort of response to the first time Trump was elected and the kind of sense of shock and the immediate demonstrations in the street. If you remember the Women's March in Washington, I'm curious to see if we're going to see anything like that in the coming months. The sort of balance is to what extent is there going to be this overt sort of pushback and resistance to Trump versus the energy within the Democratic Party to try to figure out what went wrong and to kind of, step back and reassess and live to fight another day. And I see those as sort of two things. They might both happen, but where is most of the energy going to be? And I'm going to be watching that with a lot of curiosity and interest.
How about you, Walt?
Yeah, and I'm just really interested in the specifics of this resistance. If President Trump, as he has promised on his first day, starts a mass deportation force using local and federal law enforcement to round up undocumented people living in the interior of the country, what do officials here do about that? If Trump's new Justice Department, cracks down on shipping abortion medication through the mail, which is something that has been brought up, what do officials here do about that? If the president makes targeted attacks on the offshore wind industry and, cuts off funding, what do officials here do about that? So it's a little bit wait and see, but all of these questions are in my mind, on our minds, and we'll be watching it.
Got it. Well, thank you both for this wonderful conversation. I would imagine this is going to help a lot of people process, So thank you both very much for coming through to the Common and talking with us.
Thank you.
My pleasure, Daryl.
That's WBUR Senior Political Reporter Anthony Brooks and WBUR State House Reporter Walter Wuthmann. And that's our show for today. Thank you so much for listening to The Common. If you like what you're hearing, please go to wherever you listen to podcasts, rate and review us. Let us know how you're liking the show. Also, if you want to get in touch with us, hit us up on Instagram at WBUR The Common. You can also send us an email at thecommon@wbur.org. And now it is that time for me to let you know that The Common is produced by Franny Monahan. It's mixed by Emily Jankowski and Paul Vaitkus, and it's edited by Samatha Joshi and Ben Brock Johnson. And our theme music is Me from Hisu. And from the newsroom of WBUR, I'm your host, Daryl C. Murphy. I will talk to you next week.